Good evening. I want to welcome you to our Community Task Force Bond 2022 presentation. I am Heath Morrison, very proud Superintendent, Montgomery ISD. Let me level set here. If you're here because you think you're going to get some inside scoop or information about whether or not we're going to be open on Friday, it's not going to be that kind of meeting. We are here to talk about the bond. So any conversations about whether or potential possible closings will occur, 10 o'clock tomorrow, Justin? Very good. But we are here to talk about a very important topic, and that is the possible bond that is being considered by our school district. As I said, I am the very proud superintendent of Montgomery ISD. I started last year in the district, and between opening up schools and trying to balance budgets and compensate our teachers more fairly and employees and creating a strategic plan, we try to do a lot of information gathering so that our board can make some really informed decisions, not only for the present, but for the future. And so they looked at staffing reports from a state association, they looked at facility assessments, they looked at the demographic study, and all of those things led our board to decide that we should at least consider the option and possibility of asking the voters of Montgomery to consider a bond to take care of a number of different needs. In order to really do that process well, we asked some amazing community members to come together and spend some exciting, riveting, informative nights together, looking at all the same reports that we had looked at, the same reports our board had looked at, and really engage in a thoughtful conversation about how we go from where we are to where we possibly need to be as a school district. And so tonight, you're going to get an opportunity to hear from members of that bond task force, hear the work that they did an incredible job doing, and why they have come to the conclusions and recommendations that they have presented to our board, and they're going to present to you tonight as the board has to make a very important decision on February the 15th at their board meeting. As we've done all this work, two hallmarks of everything that we have tried to do since this board first brought me to Montgomery as a superintendent. Everything we try to do with a huge commitment to transparency. That does not mean that ultimately the decisions we reach may not be the ones that you want us to, but we want you to feel good that we went through a process, that the process was clear, that we followed that process, and that we came to the conclusions for no other reason than we truly thought it would be best for every student and family in Montgomery ISD. And the other commitment is around collaboration. We are a public school district, which means that the more we have an opportunity to engage the public, the more input we can get, the better decisions and the better conclusions we will reach. And so whether it's balancing budgets, whether it's selecting high-level administrators to be the principals of our campuses, whether it was a strategic plan, every major decision that we do as a district, we do with a great community input. And the bond considerations that we are going to talk about tonight are no different. We are not only having the opportunity to have the chance to present these findings and recommendations to our folks that are here at Lake Creek High School, and I want to thank our interim principal, Mr. Dwayne McFadden, for hosting us tonight. But we also have a live stream so we also have audience members that will be available online as well. Before I turn this over to Chris Lynn, our CFO, Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations, I do want to recognize we have some of our board members here tonight. Very grateful for them to be here. We have our President, Dr. Matt Fuller. We have Secretary Linda Porton. We have member Sean Dennison. And we have member Mike Hopkins. So thank you for being here. And with that, I want to bring forward Chris Lynn, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations. Thank you.
All right, good evening. Thank you, Dr. Morrison. As Dr. Morrison stated, we've had the privilege to work with a number of members from this community throughout this task force process. And tonight, we have 5 who have graciously volunteered to walk you through their findings and their recommendations from all of the hours of their hard work. So we're going to let them do their presentation, and at the conclusion of the presentation, we will take question and answers. So let's get started this evening with one of our Lake Creek High School students who was a member of the task force, Ms. Kyler Smith.
Hi, my name is Ko Smith, and I'm a junior here at Lake Creek High School. Tonight you will be given an overview of the task force, key information items, our recommendations, and our next steps as we move forward. The task force was made up of people from all over the community, including parents, MISD staff, business owners, community members without kids or grandkids in the district, and 2 students from each of the MISD high schools. Through various perspectives, we considered the growth and capacity, building age, safety, and comparability across the district. Our charge as a task force was to consider the educational needs of all students, ensure our recommendation was fiscally sound, and to present our recommendation to the school board. We met as a group 6 times over the course of 3 months, and we were able to tour each of these campuses to see both the good and the bad conditions of our district facilities. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Allie Eichenberg. I'm part of the task force. I'm a parent here at Lake Creek. Some key information items we had. As a task force, we studied district information, including demographic projects, financial status, building conditions, opportunities for students, and more. We encourage anyone who wants to see the full data we were able to cover in our 6 meetings by going to the district website and visiting Paving to Our Path, Bond 2022.
Good evening. My name is Mary Ann Coleman, and I'm a parent here at Lake Creek High School. It is not difficult to notice Montgomery is growing. Simply drive around the community, and you will see developments popping up everywhere. Given this, MISD hired a company called Population and Survey Analysts, PASA, to conduct a demographic study to see how the growth would impact MISD. Based on PASA's results, the district knew it was likely that 3 out of our 6 elementary schools would exceed capacity by 2025, in addition to Lake Creek High School exceeding capacity by 2025. These charts show the enrollment projections for each campus as of January of 2021. The orange highlights signify that when campuses will exceed capacity. In 2018, Lake Creek High School opened with 900 students. Today, we are over capacity. In 2017, Keenan Elementary School opened. In October, they had 784 students. As of January 28th, they are at 862, with a capacity of 900. This can also be said for most of our schools in Montgomery. However, growth seems to be occurring much faster than projected in the study. Dr. Morrison shared with us that he met with all the major developers in the area, and they informed him that all of their projects are at an accelerated rate and more homes are being included in the study than in the study. In addition, he also found out that there are projects that were not included in the study that are awaiting approval momentarily, and they will also have an impact on the enrollment in Montgomery ISD. In addition to understanding our growth, Montgomery wanted to look at our facilities and wanted to be sure that they are prepared for the future. We have a wonderful district. We have wonderful campuses and facilities. However, they are showing their age, and improvements are much needed. The assessment addressed each campus and facility. Here you can see some photos of one page of the Montgomery High School assessment. You can see the full report if you go to the district website under Transparency. During our meetings, we had the opportunity to tour most of the campuses, and we were able to see for our own eyes all of the much-needed improvements.
Good evening. My name is Shannon Reed. I'm the Executive Director of Montgomery Area Chamber. It was a privilege to work on this task force and to dive into some of the information that we got to study. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the financial aspects, because the bottom line is really where we're going to have to answer the question, can we afford this? So we wanted to take a look as a task force at the construction costs and also understand how our school is financed. So let's take a look. I think this chart really helps to make this come to life. Obviously, we have construction costs, but in addition to that, as this project unfolds over time, we're going to have some inflation to consider, and then we get a total construction cost, but in addition to that, we have some other soft costs that come into play when we have to look at building permits and some surveys that have to be done, as well as our furniture to fill in the building, the technology that we'll need for new facilities. Land purchase is a part of our consideration. And we also included a contingency cost because, as we all know, a project never quite goes as planned. So we wanted to make sure we had a well-rounded total project budget to look at. So that was the first aspect that we really took into consideration. Now let's take a look at how our district is financed. I particularly like this slide because I think it helps us to understand. We actually have two tax rates here in the district. The M&O, or Maintenance and Operations, is also commonly referred to as our general fund. And then we have our INS, the interest and sinking, which is where we take care of our debt service. So let's dive into Maintenance and Operations. So these are your day-to-day or monthly expenditures, recurring expenses that you have to experience. So in the school district, this will include things like our salaries for our personnel and staff, the bus repairs and regular maintenance, school supplies and materials like that, consumables, as well as the utilities. So in your personal life, you can compare that to your regular monthly expenses that you might have, whether it's home repairs or a rental cost or your fuel for your car, groceries, those regular occurring expenses that are configured into your monthly budget. Then in the INS bucket, those are your big ticket items. So for in the school district, you're talking about new buildings or the land purchases. And then if you have any big program-specific items, or perhaps a reconstruction or a refurbishment project, even school buses would be included in this purchase cost. So for an average homeowner, that might look like that new home that you're purchasing, or if you need a new car. So you think of those large pieces that are one-time purchases. It's important to remember that on the maintenance and operations bucket, 80% of those funds go to our personnel and staff salaries here in the district. And that bucket is the bucket that you hear our school board talk about when we are balancing the budget. That's the budget that they have to work with. The other bucket, INS, deals directly with paying off debt from previous bonds or previous purchases. And it's important to remember that we cannot use INS funds to increase salaries or to pay for new positions. That is a question that comes up quite a bit during these presentations. So we just wanted to reiterate that this is like a one-time purchase of those buildings and land and projects in one time. So let's look at our current tax rate situation. Right now, our M&O tax rate at 0.8857, our INS tax rate is at 0.3743, giving us a total tax rate of $1.26 per $100 valuation on your property tax. I really like this chart because, as you can see, over the past 17 years predicted here or presented here, it has been on a decline. Our tax rate has been compressed, and you'll notice that red box that says House Bill 3 in our state legislature in 2019, the property tax and school tax reform further compressed the burden against the taxpayers. In addition to studying all of the financial aspects, we wanted to make sure that the project aligned with our school district's strategic plan and the goals that they have been working toward over the past year and a half. One of the things that particularly stood out about all of those plans was the emphasis on impacting all of our students, including the 40% that are not going directly to college as they graduate high school. So the CTE, or Career in Technology Education, rose to the top as an interest for the district and all of the community in the strategic plan. These courses, to help that percentage of our district, is really going to help not only those entering directly into the workforce, but even students who are looking for those careers that will require further education that they can partner with through the CTE project. Ultimately, we want to just hone in and emphasize the three main drivers that our task force identified to help us walk through the entire journey of getting to this recommendation. They were growth, as Marianne has already mentioned, facility upgrades in some of the slides that you saw, and you can see all of those reports on the website under transparency. And finally, the Career in Technology Education component, or the CTE. We want to emphasize that those were the three main drivers that brought us to our recommendation of the $326 million bond recommendation to the school board.
Okay, my name is Jim Hostetler. I'm also a member of the Community Task Force. Thoroughly enjoyed the process, thoroughly enjoyed the education. So it was a very worthwhile time, and I really do appreciate it. Before we were presented with a lot of information, almost a tsunami, and also we had project considerations that the task force had to define what's a consensus. How do we get to a decision point? How do we know if the 50 to 60 people on the task force really agree, and are they willing to support this recommendation that comes forward? So as a result, if I can get this to work, we determined early on that the threshold, if you will, was 66% of the people on the task force. We discussed a number of numbers up and above and below that number, but 66 was our consensus point. After the individual projects were approved, then we came back, circled back later, and said, okay, are we willing to support this entire package? And again, we overachieved on the consensus point. The task force in general agrees that the projects will address the growth that MISD is already experiencing and will continue to experience over the next decade. Now, I'm going to deep dive into the 17 projects that we came up with and that we voted on, and talk a little bit about each of those. If you have questions, start formulating them now, because the guy after me is going to answer them all. The growth projects, the first two have been mentioned, obviously, that are direct growth. These are the elementary school number 7 and the addition to Lake Creek High School, the phase 2, if you will, for an additional 900 seats. This was the elementary school consensus was 89%, and the Lake Creek High School expansion was 96% of consensus. Both of these numbers, though, however, do not include the property that's required to go to be built upon. And because that's such a elusive number right now, with property values in some cases doubling, we heard a story, I heard a story that some property only a couple years ago that was selling for $50,000 an acre, they're now asking $100,000 an acre. So the numbers are just insane, and you've read that in the newspapers and heard it on the media. So land prices are going crazy, and the developers are coming after that property for residential. Basically, it takes 2 years to build a school, and so what we decided that we needed some money to get some property now, because the district does not now own any property that they can build on for any of the 3 new locations that need to be built. So the land purchase was 100% consensus. Everybody felt we needed to get a head start on that. In addition, the idea of getting ready for junior high school number 3 several years down the road would make a lot of sense, because if we could get the land and we do some design work and get some surveys and all that sort of stuff that have to be done in advance, that we could reduce that 2 years substantially. So the task force agreed that $6 million should be put into the overall bond issue for some planning ahead for junior high number 3. We also learned that of the school bus fleet that's in place today, 35 of those buses are at or near the end of their useful life. I'm told that a new school bus can run up to $150,000. So you can do the math and see that, you know, we won't spend it all here, but the other few that we can afford will have to handle a lot of the growth. And the last item in the growth area is technology devices. The technology devices are the personal computers that are in the labs in the junior high and regular high school, and in the classroom groups in the lower grades. These are, unfortunately today, 10-year-old devices. They're devices that industry has abandoned over 5 years ago, and these are woefully obsolete. It takes half the class time just to boot them up, and so it's definitely an area that needs to be addressed, and 86% of the task force had a consensus on that. Now, the next area, moving on from growth, is the facility upgrade projects. As was mentioned earlier, there was a study done by Huckabee Architects. They orchestrated about 6 or 7 other companies who have their own specialties, and they created a study that assessed the current condition of all of the facilities within MISD. And most people think the facilities are schools, but there's actually, I believe there's 17 different facilities, and we'll talk about a few of those. Huckabee produced an executive summary, which I will tell you on one hand is a cure for insomnia, but on the other hand, there's a simple way to go through it. If you go to the website and pull it up, the transparency website, The 216-page executive summary can be scanned pretty quickly by just looking at the indents on the plus signs down the left-hand side of the page, and there's a great list of all the things that need to be done. But what the study pointed out is that the district is $63 million behind in maintenance, things that need to be done now and in the very near future. So that's an area that that's a report that was done last May. The numbers have continued to climb, and when you factor in inflation and factor in some contingency, the number we put in the bond was for $75 million. The second piece of facility upgrade is the infrastructure to really enhance the classroom technology. And I talked about the PCs and the laptops and things, but this is all the stuff that goes behind the scenes to keep those PCs available and running. So that's everything from servers and routers and racks and monitors and so forth, the real technology that's the heart of the entire network system. Unfortunately, that adds up to like $21 million, but it had 100% consensus of something that was needed to support the technology. Safety and security is another area that obviously needs a lot of attention because literally every week we hear of incidents in schools around the country. This week it was in Minnesota. It's everywhere, and it's something we need to be very concerned about. What's necessary here are security cameras, intrusion alarms, fencing, and other personal security equipment. And there was 100% consensus to put a little over $5 million in that category. Then there's transportation facility renovations. It's basically where the buses are stored and worked on. As you go through that report from Huckabee, you find that the two transportation facilities are in pretty sad shape. The roof leaks and it's near end of life. There's no fire alarms, no fire suppression. The overhead doors are damaged and don't work properly. It's not ADA compliant. Lighting controls need to be brought up to code. Almost all the pictures they show in there are all the plumbing fixtures and water heaters and so forth that are either obsolete or non-functional. And when there's a real heavy rainfall, even the toilets back up. So the transportation facilities definitely need a lot of help. And the consensus on that was 100%. More facility upgrades, something called comparability improvements. And this was something we all had to have a little bit of education on, but comparability is to remove the physical and functional variations between the facilities with respect to classroom and the grounds, so that no one facility stands out as being better or worse than the rest. So it's another area that got a very high consensus of 92%. There were four athletic complex related items. The first one, the athletic complex, also known as the football stadium, was built in 1996, I read somewhere. It was designed in a different era with far fewer students, fans, and events. The turf on the field has a 10-year life cycle. It's already 6 years into that. And if that goes too far, it causes other teams to not want to play here. It mentions on this slide the press box, and I always kind of laugh at that. The press box area is not just for the media. The press box has facility for our coaches, for the other teams' coaches that want to have an eagle-eye view of what's going on in the field. It has scouts from future teams to be played. It also has scouts from colleges who might want to look at some of our athletes and consider them for scholarships. So there needs to be room for these folks up there to be able to do a little bit of, or have a little bit of privacy as they're doing their jobs. The stadium itself needs to be expanded. It doesn't have sufficient seating capacity or parking capacity, and it needs these facilities need to be made ADA compliant. They have an elevator, but it doesn't work. Several things need to be done with respect to getting that facility back up to the standard that it should be. We also heard a story about the visitors' football locker room that's so small that the players could get dressed in the locker room, but they had to go outside in order to get their ankles taped and get ready to actually play. I don't know how that works when it rains. But the consensus on this one was 88%. Most very, very supportive. The next item is the Montgomery High School athletic renovations. This is really focused on the tennis courts and the auxiliary stadium, and it's meant to extend the life of those. And it's amazing how many groups benefit from the athletic complex upgrades that we're talking about. Just to list a few, it's football, soccer, track, cross country, baseball, softball, band, cheer, drill team, and occasionally Special Olympics. Again, the very high consensus rate of 92%. The batting cage covers at Lake Creek High School, probably something that should have been done when they were constructed originally. Most schools do it that way. Most of the other schools in the area have their batting cages covered. It's something that needs to be caught up. The consensus was 68%. And then the last two areas, these involve new buildings. Once again, no land associated with them. You've heard Shannon talk about the CTE service that we want to provide for those students who may not be going on to college. And this, the consensus was that we needed a one CTE center where offerings could be made, which I was surprised at, quite a range. They aren't all committed yet, but they're exploring them. Everything from aeronautical engineering to cosmetology, from auto technology to fine arts, from robotics and floral design, health science, and even the trades like welding, plumbing, electrical. You know, guys and gals can come out of high school with certifications where they can get good paying jobs immediately and not have to spend $10,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 on trade schools. The consensus on the CTE center was an 86%, very high. The Centralized Ag Science Center is not your basic ag barn, which is what they have today. It's a complete ag science approach, a significant step up in the ag education that would be available to our students. It would include things like vet tech classrooms, a public entrance, an exam room, storage space, animal pens, exercise pens, and a very nice show arena where kids could learn how to show their animals in a competitive environment. The Ag Science facility is one that we discussed over several meetings. While there was a consensus that we needed an Ag Science Center, the debate boiled down to, do we do one and share it, or do we have two? And the consensus did not reach 66% on either one approach. While in general it was supported, we're going to let the school board decide how they want to approach that. So, in summary, due to the state statutes, what you'll probably see is the $326,907,090 spread across three propositions. The athletic complex, or any athletic complex that has more than 1,000 seats, apparently has to be on a line item of its own on a bond election. Similarly with the technology devices, they have to be on a separate line item. All the rest go into the Proposition A. And I point this out is because there's should not be interpreted as being any less support for Proposition B or C. It's simply a requirement that they be listed separately. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hostetler. Thank you to all of those task force members who helped us go throughout this process. I know we have several of you in the room tonight, so just want you to know how much we appreciate you volunteering to be a part of this process and all of the amazing work that you put into it and that came out of that process. And a special thank you to those task force members who have so graciously volunteered to get up here and present. I think this is your third time now, and you're doing such a remarkable job that, you know, we're probably going to keep coming back to you and asking for even more. But just thank you for everything that the task force has done throughout this process. The last question, or before we get to questions, one of the most important questions that we get asked often is, what is the impact? How are we going to pay for this recommendation? And so the average home value in Montgomery ISD is $350,000. And so for the average home in Montgomery ISD, we would need to increase that INS tax rate by $22.29 per year on that $350,000 average home. Once again, $22.29 per year, so less than $2 a month, would pay for that $326.9 million recommendation from the task force. Should the board decide to move forward with an election, obviously we will be communicating more information about the projects and additional tax impact information, but this gives the average homeowner an idea of what the impact is currently. So with that, let's open it up for questions, and we can take questions not only from those that are in attendance here this evening, but I believe, Justin, we can also take questions from our online participants as well. So
yes, we can, and we actually did get a question that relates to your last slide, so we can start with that while folks in the audience are thinking of their questions. It's a comment followed by a question. I have heard that if the increase to the homestead exemption is approved by voters in May, homeowners in Montgomery ISD would see a decrease in their property taxes even if the bond were to pass. Is that true?
that is a great question. And so one of the items that at this point we believe will be on the ballot is a constitutional referendum on homestead exemption. Currently in the state of Texas, your homestead, you're allowed to claim a $25,000 homestead exemption. Under this constitutional amendment, it would increase that from $25,000 to $40,000 for a homestead. So with that additional increase in homestead exemption, obviously that would lessen the tax impact that would be incurred by the homeowners with any potential bond referendum. And we will have more specific information about those details should the board decide to call for a referendum.
Hi. I guess when I've talked to most people about their concerns for the bond is one of the things they talk about is open enrollment and how much open enrollment we've had in the past. It seems like this year we did a little too much open enrollment, but maybe I'm wrong on the numbers on that. But do you see allowing open enrollment in the future? What I've heard from other committee members is that they probably wouldn't do it for the secondary levels, but maybe in the elementary level. But even with that, you're having kids come in, if they stay in the district, they'll be there all the way through high school. And the person also asked me about, would it make me feel better if the people paid fees? But these kids on open enrollment are like taking kids' spots. Like as the school grows, there's still only so many spots on the soccer team. So as an open enrollment kid gets to take a spot on that soccer team, there's only, the top 10% get automatic admission into college. What about those open enrollment kids pushing your kid out of the top 10% or leadership roles in different clubs and stuff? So what do you see as like the school using open enrollment in the future?
Sure, appreciate the question. So let me just make sure everyone, limited open enrollment was something that started in Montgomery ISD, I believe, in 2003. I think when it was launched, the superintendent at the time and the board really shared the reason for it was because it allowed to drive some additional revenue for the district. Our district is sometimes challenged with the way we get financed throughout Texas financing, federal funding. People have heard we're a Robin Hood district or recapture, and so oftentimes as we're trying to plan thoughtfully for the budget, midway through the year you find out that you're going to be sending even more resources to the state from our community when that's already concerned in terms of how much we're able to keep here through property values. So it was started really to help the operating budget. And it has in fact done that because you get the state dollars that comes with each student. And so that's continued since 2003. We made a decision recently to stop limited open enrollment in the future. It was not an easy decision because those same budget challenges that were there in 2003, they're still here now. And I'll just give an example at the federal level. You might have heard that there are these things called ESSER funds, and huge amounts of money given to public school districts all over the country. Texas got $17 billion, right? So you're thinking, hey, that's a lot of money. Conroe, this was in the paper front page, I think Conroe got like $100 million. So you're like, well, they're 6 times bigger than we are, so that means we should at least get somewhere between 15, maybe 18 million. That's about how much Willis got, and we're bigger than Willis, so you're shaking, maybe that means we're going to get 20 or 30. We got 1.7. And so it's challenging. And so the additional revenue on the operating side of the budget, it was something that we had to look at. Ultimately, as our task force shared, that demographic study shared a lot of growth projected over the next 10 years. And initially, the demographic study suggested that we would start hitting our capacity at several schools, including Lake Creek, Keenan, Oak Hills, around 2025. So because we did not have that demographic study in the spring of last year, early in the spring, we felt that we had to at least continue limited open enrollment until we had more data. When we started the summer, we saw that not only were we getting all the growth for this upcoming year that was in the demographic study, we were even getting more. So we quickly closed limited open enrollment at this school, at Oak Hills, and Keenan. And then really we have not accepted any additional students for limited open enrollment in any of our schools since August. As was also stated by the Bond Task Force, sometimes demographic studies are impacted by other factors, and so the data is good, but then there's no demographic study that was done in 2019 that could have possibly predicted COVID and its impacts. So myself and Mr. Lynn went out, we took the time to meet with 14 of the largest developers in this community, and we asked really 2 questions. Are the data in our demographic study still true? In other words, are you still building what is in the study at the same level on the same timeline? And is there anything else we ought to know about? We quickly found from these 14 developers that everything that was in that demographic study was still going on, except it was all accelerated, and almost in every case, more than what was projected. And then we found several other developments that were not even in our demographic study. And we continue to hear that today. And so those factors really, the accelerated growth, really led us to the decision to close limited open enrollment. So we made that announcement in December that we will not be offering limited open enrollment. That did not come easily because, again, there is an operating impact cost, but we felt that because of this accelerated growth that's concentrated especially right now at that 3 or 4 of our schools, but it's going to be felt at all of our schools, that was the responsible thing for us to do. Obviously, for employees, we will continue to allow employees to bring their children into Montgomery ISD. That's a great way to recruit new talent and to retain the great talent that we have. And we also felt that it was appropriate to allow families that we'd already granted to finish off as a disruption to their families. So that was the decision. So limited open enrollment is closed, and we feel like that is the appropriate decision. So. Well, limited open enrollment is closed, so the only people that will be able to come with limited open enrollment will be future employees and their families. And so I don't know. Well, it's been open since 2003, so this is the first time it's been closed. Again, if we were to ever to change that, we would do what we've done in every situation. Again, I focus on transparency and collaboration. So we would talk about if there was any desire to go back and open it or open it in a limited capacity at some schools because of enrollment projections. We'd have lots of meetings like we're doing tonight. We'd take questions, we get input, and then ultimately try to make a collaborative decision. But based off of the enrollment projections, based on the continued growth, we've had over 500 students more since this year than we had at the conclusion of last year, and we see that continuing to go. So I don't see any time in the near future that we would open up limited open enrollment again. But you know, I'm not going to stand up here and say that 10 years from now, I hope I'm still the superintendent, but there may be another superintendent. I hope all of our school board members, they're pretty darn awesome. I hope they're still on the board. But you know, that could always be subject to change. But as long as I am the superintendent, and as long as I know I serve the 7 individuals that are currently on this board, we will continue to make every decision with transparency and collaboration. So, yeah.
All right. How confident are you and the district in the projections that were in the demographic study? And then does limited open enrollment have any impact on opening all these new schools?
Yeah, well, Chris, I'm looking over at you. I'm pretty confident in terms of the demographic study. As I said, it's a quality group that did that study. They're nationally known. Many school districts in Texas use them. So they have a research base that validates their methodology and really the focused way they do their work. We really went back to talk to these developers only because we were hearing that there were other developments that weren't in our study, so we were really trying to figure out, you know, how much additional growth could we see. So we absolutely believe the growth is coming. As Mary Ann said, all you have to do is drive around this community, and you're seeing it. And so we believe that that's going to continue. So I'm confident that what's in there is not only going to be validated, but it's actually going to probably come in higher than that. Really, there's a little over 400 students that are limited open enrollment. A lot of those are employee students. Since limited open enrollment is now closed, that number will continue to decrease and not be a factor in the need to open up additional schools. So.
We do have another question from the YouTube audience. What does comparability mean in terms of discussing this bond proposal?
Sure. So comparability means as being new to the district, some of the comments that we heard, well, there was this perceived have and have-nots. Because as we're sitting in this building tonight, a beautiful brand new building, unfortunately not all of our buildings were built at the same time as this building. And so none of our buildings will ever be equal. Okay, because they are built at different times throughout the district's history. But all of our buildings should be comparable, meaning no matter which building you go into, you should have the same access to technology, the same instructional environments, the same, at the elementary school, playground equipment, cafeteria tables that aren't broken or not functioning. Those things are items that are going to be addressed through our comparability initiative. In addition, that's also where we are going to make some improvements to our fine arts programs. So for example, at Montgomery High School, band and choir, theater, Montgomery Junior High, bringing those programs up to comparable standings to what was built at Oak Hills, and Montgomery High School comparable to what was provided here at Lake Creek. And so the thought is really making sure, once again, our buildings will never be equal, but they should be comparable. No matter which building you go into, you should have the same access to education, technology, no matter which building you're in.
And I will also say with comparability, it's one of the things I'm really excited about with the bond task force, including that as part of their recommendations, because it really does allow us to address that there should be a standard at each of our high schools to serve our teachers, to serve our students, and it allows us to make sure that those standards are met at all of our current facilities and any future facilities. It is an opportunity to go and address some needs at some of our older campuses like Montgomery High School, Montgomery Junior High School, Montgomery Elementary School, and Lincoln. One of the things I know that's gotten a lot of our families excited about is playgrounds, because playgrounds were a vital part of elementary education. I'm looking at our Assistant Superintendent of Elementary shaking her head. And so our playgrounds right now across Montgomery ISD are not comparable. Some are shaded, some are not. Some have equipment that is aged, and some have brand new equipment. So to be able to have a rotation where eventually we will replace the playground equipment at every one of our schools, but we'll start with those schools most in need, is a very exciting part of this bond package. It is interesting, at our last town hall, which was at Montgomery High School, after we had done the general part of the Q&A, we stuck around for questions, as we will tonight. And one gentleman came up and said, you know, Dr. Morrison, there's a lot of great things in this bond package. I'm just really struggling with those covered batting cages at Lake Creek. I just don't, I'm ready to not vote for it. And I'm like, well, really, it's $326 million, and you're not going to vote for it for, I think it's $700,000. And he goes, I'm just struggling with it. And I'm like, do you like all the other parts of comparability? He goes, yeah, that's absolutely needed. I'm like, well, Montgomery High School has a covered batting cage. As a matter of fact, just about any high school built in the state of Texas in the last 20 years has covered batting cages. As a matter of fact, Little League in our community has covered batting cages. So are we going to say the only school that is acceptable not to have it is Lake Creek? He goes, you got me, Doc. So comparability is important in a lot of different ways, and we really are excited about not only making sure we have that in our facilities and our buildings with our athletics, but also our fine arts programs. Very, very important. What else? Yeah, I'm going to ask our director of CTE to come forward, and it gives me an opportunity to introduce her and brag about the really amazing work she's been doing since arriving in our district. I just want to say what really, to me, is an amazing portion of this recommendation and a part of our commitment to the strategic plan. Montgomery ISD, everyone thinks, all of our kids are going to college, and many, many do. And part of our strategic plan is to make sure they just not only go to college, but they go ready day one to be prepared to take credit-bearing courses without remediation. That's the standard. But it's about 64% of our kids, which is by far the highest of any of our surrounding school districts, going to college. But even with that, that means 36% of our kids are not immediately going to college. And so a commitment to career technical education, that commitment to serve those students as well, which really embed the same skills and knowledge in many cases that our kids going to college will need, but to do it with dedicated facilities is really an opportunity to really take our district on that trajectory to go to premier. So in terms of your question about the specific programs, why those programs, and how we're going to make sure that they're paid and covered for, Amy Vance.
Those are really good questions. And we've come up with programs we're going to put there so that we could get an estimate that could be subject to change if, as of right now, automotive, construction, welding, robotics and engineering, health sciences, culinary arts, cosmetology, and a floral design, like open to the public, a flower shop. I'm trying to think if I'm leaving something off. AV, AV. So like an AV production, which is our video editing type class. So an AV studio is also included in there. And part of their robotics is a competitive robotics arena as well, where we could host events and things like that. So our goal for that, I couldn't put everything because of how expensive it is to build. This same exact CTE center 5 years ago would have been half the cost. So we're dealing with inflation, and anyone that's building anything right now, everything is crazy. And we're also dealing with our being safe a few years down the road, 3-4 years down the road, how much are things going to cost? So this is our safe number, and I'd love to put everything over there, but I can't. So those are the new programs, and we're bringing some over. We'll probably keep some of the introductory level courses on the campuses, just because they don't need a specialized lab, and it'll help displace some students. But even the kids we're moving over to the CTE Center, and the courses we're hoping will help displace some seats and some classrooms and things for Lake Creek and MHS for growth. So did I answer your question about the CTE Center? So funding wise, if you were on the task force, I had a whole little mini 20-minute session talking about CTE funding and where it comes from and how we're going to pay to keep it open. Like, is this going to cost the district more money? And CTE, it's kind of its own entity where our students enrolled in our courses, they create funding, and it's a weighted funding. So they get more funding than a kid in a math or an English or a science class, because the idea is the kids in our classes, it costs more to run that classroom. And so that funding pays for the teacher and the supplies and things like that. And so having this facilities and centers hopefully is going to draw more kids to enroll in the programs, so that we can have more enrollment and more money in the CTE programs. Part of my task whenever I came, and there was not a CTE director before, but one of my initial tasks was to allocate budget and money to every program in the district. And that has been done this year. Everybody has money available for supplies or anything they need. They've always had it, but now it's designated to that classroom so that there won't be an issue of people saying. There's course fees with a lot of classes. Those are completely going away. That's part of our CTE funding. They're not going to have to pay to take a welding class or a health science class. We're going to pay for their certifications and anything related to their course. If it's something specific with your student, talk to me privately. If there shouldn't be any issues with supplies or anything with classes. So if there is with your students, your children, please. Okay, I'm like, okay, if it's right now, please tell me. So if it's right now, please talk to me privately so we can make sure that's handled. But did I answer all your questions? All right.
So some of these, will they be open to the public, I think you said, and does that help pay for?
So open to, not open to take classes. You mean for services, automotive, we'll have a restaurant open. That's the vision of this center, is to interact with the public and be open, where the kids they're serving the public, getting those employability skills and soft skills and people skills by serving them in a restaurant or in an automotive setting, where they're still in a classroom setting with an adult teaching them how to have these skills and using, taking money. So if we have, all that will help reimburse some of the supplies for the classrooms and that kind of stuff. So it's just like any type of selling of a fundraiser. It's the same type of accounts. It's not going to fund their classroom as much as the restaurant. So if they're selling food in a restaurant, that money will go back to the restaurant to buy the supplies and that. We're not going to rely on the servicing the public for the supplies of our classrooms, but it really will help grow their program and buy any extras or things that they might need. And an automotive shop, same thing, buying all the filters and all the oil and that type of stuff. So yes, the money will go back into the programs directly. We're not going to utilize it for the district anywhere. Any other questions?
I have a question, Amy. I saw the recommendations that the Ag Science Center did not get 66% support. So does that mean that we don't have support for doing amazingly cool things for ag in Montgomery ISD?
I think, in my opinion, that we have amazing support in our district and in our community. It's one of our biggest CTE programs, our ag science programs at both campuses. We're also adding Principles of Ag, the intro class. We're adding it to the junior highs next year. So we're hoping that'll even grow the program even more. I feel the conflict with the Ag Science Center isn't about our support or not support. It's more of a wanting their own facilities at each campus or having a centralized. It's more about a geographical thing and an ownership thing and not a support of our programs, because I feel amazing support from our community and parents and teachers and everything else. I don't think the opposition to it isn't about the program as much as everybody's interest in where it's located, or that's more of the focus.
Thank you, Amy. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but I did. I just wanted to make sure that that was put out there, because what I will say, having gone through these meetings, and I think, Jim, you have said this before, there was 100% support for doing amazingly awesome things for ag with CTE. There was an amazing philosophical difference between what's the best way to deliver on that. There were folks on the committee that felt passionately that the best way for us to serve all of Montgomery ISD is a centralized facility, have scales of efficiency, operational excellence, be able to put a show place there that will be really a crown jewel for our school district and our students, be able to put vet tech, and they were very passionate about that. We also had folks that were just as passionate, believing that the best way for us to serve our ag students is to have excellent ag barns at each school, and that proximity to the school will cut down on travel and better serve our students being able to take care of their animals. And really, it was an amazing conversation, lots of passion, lots of discourse, lots of respect. And as I said at one of our bond task force meetings, I wish some folks in our state capitals and our nation's capital could see how thoughtful people who care passionately can disagree, but ultimately all want the same things, which is amazing programs for our students in ag. It is the hardest part, I'm sure, as our board has to deliberate this, because it's the one recommendation, if they choose to move forward with the bond, that did not reach the 66% consensus. So that is something that they will be having to have some deliberations on. So with that, let me offer this. If you had questions, but you would rather ask myself or Chris or any of staff that's here tonight in a more personal setting, we're going to stick around. Happy to take your questions, your input, your suggestions, your ideas. Along with Chris, myself, we have our Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Education and Interim Principal, Mr. Dwayne McFadden. Dwayne, you want to wave? Assistant Superintendent, Carrie Fitzpatrick. You want to wave, Carrie? We have our Executive Director of Curriculum and Instructions, Dr. Mark Weatherly. We have our Athletic Director, Mr. Clint Hurd. We have Amy Vance with CTE. We have Joe Kennard, who's in charge of our facilities. I think I got everybody right. And Justin Moreno, our amazing Executive Director of Communications, but I figure he's still communicating things like whether or not we're going to be open on Friday. Let me leave you with this. So next steps, our board will be having a workshop next week where they will have an opportunity to really dive deep, ask questions, get all the information they need to make a very important decision on February the 15th. At that meeting, they will make a decision about whether or not to call for an election. If they vote to do that, then the voters of Montgomery will have an amazing opportunity to decide what happens with this come May 7th. But I want to, again, extend my appreciation to our bond task force. It was many hours. It was a lot of work, great conversations, and ultimately an amazing recommendation. And when I said that everything we try to do is with transparency and collaboration, we publicized the meetings. As soon as the meetings were concluded, we put the notes, all the information they saw went up on our website because that was very important so that the public can be involved as well. And as far as collaboration, as staff, we're constantly looking at data. We're constantly trying to think about the needs of our district. We're constantly trying to think about the recommendations that we have to bring forward to our board for approval. And so over the summer and in the fall, we were thinking about potentially what could be in a bond or not be in a bond. And we came up with a list. And I reflected on that list. I was cleaning my office the other day, and I saw that list. Out of the things we had on that list, there's only 2 things that we had that from start to finish are no different than when we started this process. That is Elementary 7 and the addition to Lake Creek High School. Every other recommendation that this task force presented is modified, changed, or new. And I will say it makes for a better bond recommendation through their hard work. So can we please give them a big round of applause again? Thanks to all of you for making the time to be here tonight. Thanks for the folks that participated through YouTube. And again, we will stick around for any questions that you have. Please drive safely. I don't think there's anything going on tonight, but you should always drive safely. Thank you so much.